Grandmaster Dan Naroditsky was commentating on a game between legendary players Garry Kasparov and Hikaru Nakamura at the St. Louis Fast and Blitz tournament. Kasparov stated with d4, Nakamura responded with knight f6, opting for the Nimzo Indian defense. After knight c3, bishop v4, Kasparov considers his options and eventually played c2, a move he has been using in the Blitz tournaments. However, he also frequently plays e3. Nakamura, an expert in the Nimzo Indian, chose queen c2, the typically mainline castle. Both players smiled when the bishop takes c3 and queen moves to e3, following the main line d5. Kasparov played knight f3, and in this position, black usually takes on c4, which Nakamura did, and then played b6 to develop the bishop to e6, attacking the queen. Kasparov responded with a smile and played h4, a move he has trademarked. He has used this move a few times and is one of the few players to employ it. Kasparov observed Nakamura, trying to gauge his opponent's response. Nakamura was not fond of the risky move h4. White initiated the attack by playing h5 and h6, even though not all pieces were developed. Nakamura countered with c5, following the general rule of striking in the center when there is activity on the flank. Kasparov captured on c5, leading to a pawn sacrifice. Now, Kasparov faced a major choice. He could capture the pawn on c5, but that would expose his queen to vulnerability, and black could build up with knight a6. Alternatively, Kasparov could continue developing or push his h-pawn, playing h5 and threatening h6 to create weakness on the black's king side. Currently, Kasparov's king remained in the center. If he could advance his g-pawn to g5, it would cause problems for black's king side. Nakamura needed to speed up on the other side of the board to prevent Kasparov from overwhelming him on the king side. However, Kasparov was taking his time and was low on time. He made the principled move g4, going for Nakamura's throat. Nakamura had no time to waste, because if Kasparov managed to play g5, the situation would become difficult on the king side. Nakamura could consider moves like bishop a6 or bringing his queen to d5 to offer a queen trade, and he chose the latter. Kasparov seemed a bit surprised by the move, with an endgame scenario was now possible for white. He almost immediately captured the queen with a knight, which was a somewhat unexpected decision. Taking with a pawn could have fixed the pawn structure. Now black had a weak pawn on c5, and even though the queens were off the board, white could still launch an attack on the king side. Kasparov proceeded with g5, knowing that the safety of his own king was no longer a concern. Hikaru brings out either of his bishops, and the idea of playing h5 and h6 to create more weaknesses on the black's king side is something that Hikaru also needs to be concerned about. Nakamura develops his knight to c6, and now rook c1 seems like a natural move. Kasparov appears surprised by that move as well. He's probably wondering how Hikaru will defend the c-pawn after rook c1. White could also play rook g1 to continue the attack on the king side. However, Kasparov chooses rook c1, and Hikaru responds with knight d4, which was his idea. Kasparov contemplates taking the pawn on c5, acknowledging that it wasn't such a bad move by Hikaru. However, he decides to take back on c5 and doesn't see sufficient compensation for black. Hikaru has a pair of good-looking knights, but one of them is traded on f3. Kasparov ends up with a slightly damaged pawn structure, but is up a healthy pawn. He still has the two bishops, control over the g5, pressure on the king side. White has a much better position, but Kasparov needs to convert it into a full point while keeping an eye on his time, which is running low at around 2.5 minutes. He should consider developing his other bishop, perhaps bishop d3 or bishop h3. Suddenly, Kasparov surprises everyone with the move rook h4, activating his rook along the side and potentially bringing it over the queen side with rook h to c4. He doesn't want to give up control of any squares. Hikaru could play rook c8, but then Kasparov could double up on the c file, putting more pressure on black. The situation looks really dire for Hikaru, but he doesn't seem too concerned. He responds with rook b8, targeting the pawn on b2. The natural move for the Kasparov here is b2 to b4, perhaps aiming to play a5 and open up the b5. However, that would involve sacrificing another pawn, which appears dangerous. Hikaru's move a6 slows down the Kasparov's pawns, preventing b5 and rook d4. Kasparov realizes he needs to accelerate his play, regardless of the position. Hikaru is capable of causing problems. Kasparov starts showing signs of anxiety. He senses that he is close to winning this game. Kasparov centralizes his rook with rook d4, putting more pressure on the knight on d5. His plan is to play bishop c4, targeting the undefended bishop on d7. Hikaru responds by getting his bishop to b5, which is a nice move, and explains why he played a6. If Kasparov trades, the file will open up, and the pawn on a3 will become weak. I believe Garry should play bishop h3, moving that bishop away as the e6 pawn is undefended. However, Garry chooses bishop g2 instead. He seems to have a fascinating plan in mind. He wants to push his f pawn, possibly playing f3, f4, and even f5 to weaken the knight on d5. Another option for Garry is to take on d5 and trade his bishop for an extra pawn, potentially leading to an opposite-colored bishop endgame with 1 or 2 extra pawns for white. Garry is in a low-risk position of losing this game. The question is, can he continue to press forward? Hikaru slows down the pawn advance with f5. Taking on d5 may not be the wisest idea, and Garry hesitates before opting for bishop f3, improving his position. Hikaru responds immediately with king h7, possibly aiming to put pressure on Garry's clock. Garry needs to make a decision. How will he capture on d5? He chooses bishop c3, perhaps with the intention of playing king d2 to remove the king from the e-file, which he does. Hikaru preemptively doubles on the e-file and plays rook d8. Garry faces a dilemma. Taking on d5 would allow the black's rook to infiltrate to e2 at the end of the line. So, Garry contemplates improving his position further. He checks the clock, scratches his head, and enters a thoughtful state. With less than 2 minutes remaining, he must make a decision. Should he capture the knight on d5, or is there another way to improve his position? Hikaru doesn't appear pleased with this situation. He also has a decision to make. Trade the rook or play rook e2 check first. Trading the rooks and then executing rook e2 check to target as many of the white's pawns on the second rank as possibly seems like a good plan for black. However, the situation is challenging. Garry is now up 2 pawns, but can he convert this advantage into the endgame? Opposite-colored bishop endgames can be drawn, even with one side down 2 on 3 pawns. Hikaru needs to try bring his king over to the queen's side, as Garry aims to create a passed pawn and establish a 2-on-1 advantage. If Garry can preserve one of the pawns, he will have good winning chances. Hikaru is struggling to find a move and is down to 45 seconds. He appears frustrated, searching for a way to salvage the game. Bishop b5 is played by Hikaru, and immediately Garry responds with a4, displacing the bishop from b5. Hikaru trades on a4, and Garry needs to keep the f4 pawn alive. At this point, Garry's bishop can go to g5. With only 15 seconds remaining, Hikaru is likely to play bishop e7, followed by bishop g5 and pushing the b pawn. Garry will seize the opportunity. As anticipated, Hikaru plays bishop e7 and Carlsen resigns. Garry Kasparov emerges victorious against Hikaru Nakamura. If you want to watch more videos like this, click on the playlist link. Do you like it? Kindly give your valuable response in our comment section below, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting and informative videos.